Shana Tova. As many of you know, our congregation has partnered with a local public school, Reynolds Elementary School, to provide support in whatever ways we can to their children, their families, their teachers, and the principal. Reynolds Elementary is not far from Beth Yeshurun. It's in an area called Sunnyside. And interestingly, there was just an article about Sunnyside that was featured in the Houston Chronicle just yesterday. According to the article, Sunnyside is a historically black neighborhood in South Houston set up for black people in 1912 by a white councilman as the other segregated neighborhoods in the city center grew crowded. The city of Houston didn't annex Sunnyside until 1956. Nearly 2 decades before it was formally annexed, the best use the city of Houston could find for Sunnyside was quite literally garbage. The city put a 300-acre dump in the neighborhood in 1937. In 1964, the city opened a second dump in Sunnyside. 3 years later, a new incinerator on the original dump spewed toxic fumes into the neighborhood. The dumps have shut down, thankfully, with the promise of a solar farm to replace at least one of them. But in the meantime, Sunnyside is still a food desert. It has exactly one grocery store, a Fiesta. In other words, Sunnyside is a typical under-resourced neighborhood in our city of Houston. It was precisely for that reason that we worked with the Houston Area Urban League to pick a public school in this neighborhood. And as I said, it's not very far from us. It's only about 8 miles away. Our immediate project is to get school supplies for the students, but our plan is to make this a long-term relationship. If you would like to make a donation for the school and its students, please go to our website where you can do that after Yontif. We also have an Amazon wish list that we created with particular items that the school needs. Or you can offer to volunteer for future projects we will have with the school by contacting our committee chair, Diane Levy. All of these options can be found on our website. This project grew out of frustration, watching the news over the summer of killings, demonstrations, anger, violence, and looting. And depending on which news station you watched, you might have come away with a very different perspective on what was happening than someone who was watching a different news source. So I'm not going to relitigate tonight the arguments that we have seen and heard on the news channels that we chose to watch. I'm not interested in endless finger-pointing or whatabouting. Rather, as we begin the new year on the Jewish calendar for myself, I can say that one of my personal priorities in the coming year is to try and promote some healing in our community. God knows we have had quite enough of divisiveness, anger, hostility, and bigotry. So the question I believe we should all ask ourselves is, what am I going to do about it? And in answer to that question, a number of people have sent me a short excerpt from the TV news show 60 Minutes, where Mike Wallace is interviewing Morgan Freeman, in which Freeman suggests that we should just stop talking about racism. I'm going to stop calling you a white man, Freeman said, and I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man. I know you as Mike Wallace, and you know me as Morgan Freeman. And I believe the point he was trying to make is a very important one. When we look at someone and we see their skin color, do we automatically make assumptions about who they are, what they think, what religion they observe? By the way, you may forget that there are plenty of Jews of color, whether they are born Jewish or they choose to become Jewish. If we do make assumptions about someone because of the color of their skin or their age or their body weight or the color of their hair or the clothes they're wearing or some other superficial characteristic, that is prejudice. We are making prejudgments about that person. Sometimes, some of the things that pop into our heads might be true, but often we are completely wrong. Yet we do it all the time. All of us do. And I mean all of us. And the consequence is that we do not really see the whole person. So we all need to be aware when we do it, and then check ourselves and remind ourselves that the person we're looking at is a whole human being with a history of life experiences we probably know nothing about. I think that is what Morgan Freeman was trying to get at. Stop calling me a black man. I'm Morgan Freeman, a real person, a whole person with a real life experience. Get to know me for who I am and my whole being. But I don't think that he was saying that there's no such thing as racism. And I say that because I actually Googled Morgan Freeman on racism. And he has said several other things that clearly indicate that he is well aware that there is racism in our society. By the way, the clip of his interview with Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes was taken from 2005. In June of this year, he offered to share on his Instagram account his followers' experiences with real-life racism in their own lives. So he knows that there is real racism in America. Racism, prejudice, anti-Semitism, they're all real. But again, the question we should ask ourselves on this Rosh Hashanah, when our country is experiencing such turmoil and division, is what do we want to do about it? Do we want to promote and perpetuate a dystopian future where prejudice and division are rampant? We can do that by endlessly arguing about who is to blame, or that other person, it's that other person, whoever that is, who's really the problem. Or alternatively, we can choose to be part of the solution and reach out to other communities to encourage understanding, cooperation, and love. We are, after all, commanded to love our neighbors as ourselves. And on this commandment, by the way, Rabbi Joseph Telushkin brings a Hasidic story that's very relevant to our situation. It seems that two peasants were sitting at an inn, drinking together, and one asked the other, "Do you love me?" And the other man replied, "I love you very much." But then the first man said, "You say you love me, but you don't know what I need. If you really loved me, you would know." And the Hasidic rabbi who told this story adds, to know the needs of a person and to bear the burden of that person's sorrow, that is true love of another. And then Rabbi Telushkin himself adds, to love others is to know what hurts them and to know what they need. But I also, Telushkin says, I also have compassion for the second person. His love for his friend might have been very real, even if he didn't know what the other one's pain was. It seems to me, he said, that it's the responsibility of the one who is in need to tell others what he or she needs. My friends, if we do not engage in dialogues, in serious relationships with other communities, how can we understand what they need, what they feel? Over the summer, I listened to a number of radio programs, podcasts, Zoom meetings, and other events, and I learned a whole lot of things I never knew about the African American experience in America. I know I'm not alone. Most of you probably did the same thing. Many of us have learned more about the history of racism in this country, a history that we might have thought we knew, but obviously did not know well enough. We have listened to the stories of anguish of our fellow Americans of color and heard their pain and their despair. I think we should all try to do a lot more learning and listening. And you know, it's also a two-way street. Are we concerned about anti-Semitism? So what do we want to do about that? We can cry Gewalt amongst ourselves, or we can engage in relationships with others so that they get to know real Jews. They will come to know our history, our tsuras, what hurts us. I suspect that most anti-Semites do not know any Jews. Or maybe they know one Jew who happened to have done something bad to them, and they go on to believe that all Jews are just like that person. The relationship that we're building at Reynolds Elementary School, we see as a partnership for 3 reasons. First, we're not seeing this as us trying to second guess what they need or what they feel. We're asking them to tell us and then try and figure out the ways that we can help. Second, we do not see this as a one and done deal. We're looking to build a lasting relationship with the school and its community. And finally, we hope that we'll be enriching the lives of these elementary school students, but we know that our lives will also be enriched as a result of learning more about them and their community and their neighborhood. In the Rosh Hashanah Musaf service, there's a very short prayer we usually don't pay much attention to. In fact, this year, because we're trying to trim some parts of the service to make it easier to watch at home on the computer or screen, we're going to skip singing it. But you may recognize from the first few words this prayer, Hayom Harat Olam. It translates something like this: today, the world came into being. Today, all creation stands in judgment. Whether as your children or as your servants, if as your children have compassion on us as a parent is compassionate with children, and if as your servants, we look to you to be gracious to us and bring a judgment of light and hope. This prayer we ordinarily sing 3 times in the morning service after each of the sections where the shofar is blown. But these few words of Hayom Harat Olam encapsulate the symbolic meaning of Rosh Hashanah and the entire purpose of the service. We're reminded of 4 things. Hayom Harat Olam, the whole world was created today. And that gives us God's perspective, or we imagine what God's perspective of that whole world is. Something like how the astronauts see the world from outer space. And from that perspective, our hostility and obsessive materialism seem so trivial, so unimportant. Second, we are reminded that we are all God's children, created in God's image, descendants of one humanity. The different shades of skin color create a beautiful rainbow, something we should marvel at and cherish. At the same time, we are each individuals with our own souls to nourish. Each human life is precious in God's sight, and it should be seen as precious by each one of us as well. Each one of us is a child of God. Third, we are each accountable for how we treat the precious life that God has given us, and how we treat the amazing planet that we live on, and how we treat each other. Every Rosh Hashanah, we are called to account for how we have behaved in the last year, and we should try to repair whatever mistakes we might have made. And finally, every Rosh Hashanah is a rebirth. Hayom Harat Olam. Today the world is created. It's a renewal of creation. Today the world is created anew. It's an opportunity to start over, to embark on a new path, a better way to treat each other and our world. The prayer calls upon us to see ourselves either as children or as servants of the Holy One. If we are like children, then we imagine that God will treat us kindly as a loving parent cares for her or his children. If we are like servants, and if we are truly serving God's purposes, then we imagine that God will be kind and gracious to us and grant us a year of light and hope. This prayer affirms our belief that all of humanity has been charged with the responsibility of taking care of this sacred, special place we call Earth, and the responsibility of taking care of each other. Let us then work together to create a new year of light and hope for us, for our city, for our country, and for all of God's creation. L'Shana Tova, may this indeed be a good new year.